Thank you so much, Joni, for that perfect introduction. That was so sweet and so nice, and perfectly segues into what I want to say, because I think that this award is every bit as, or this whole afternoon is really about celebrating whole children and telling you a little bit about where we started and how important it's been to me. And I'm going to try. I never get sentimental at these things. It's actually hard for me not to, because it has been so important to me. So the first time I met Carrie, I thought she seemed very appealing and sweet and a little bit nutty. Our kids were both in the Amherst preschool at the time, and we were meeting at in the park with a group of other mothers. It was a lovely idea in theory, except for the fact that none of our kids understood the concept of how to play in the park. My son Ethan dribbled wood chips on the sidelines. The others had to be coaxed up and down ladders and helped down slides. We were so intent on maneuvering our kids around play structures that came so easily to other kids, we'd forgotten entirely that we'd made the park play date for a chance to get to know each other. This is what happens when you're the mother of a child diagnosed with a disability. For a long time, your world simply closes down. You don't dare look at other children your child's age, developing normally, striding past milestones, because it might be more depressing than you can bear. You don't socialize much beyond your immediate family because friendships take time and energy that you no longer have. Your life boils down to a simple equation. You plus your child trying to find a place in the world where he can fit so you can relax. Certainly this park wasn't that place. None of us could do anything except try to teach our children how other children played. It was another reminder of what we had too many reminders of already. Our children had cut us off from many things. Normal expectations, normal family outings, even a normal community of other mothers. In theory, we had everything in common, and we might be great friends, but how could we manage it when none of us could safely look away from our child? When all of us were sleep deprived, even beyond most parents of young children, because we all lay awake every night trying to imagine a less lonely future for our child and ourselves. This was the scene where I first met Carrie. I had this idea, she told us, in a conversation that stretched over an hour of interruptions. It might sound a little crazy, but I want to start a place where we can bring all our kids and take fun classes. They'll get their therapies with the other kids and they'll be having so much fun they won't even realize it. And maybe we can all, I don't know, sit in the lobby and talk. The first time I heard this, I thought, boy, Carrie's really losing her mind. She's so sleep deprived, she slipped into delusional thinking. I smiled politely. We all did that first time. Then I was stuck. I'd asked her older son, Kushal, to give Ethan drumming and music lessons in his basement, which meant I was in her kitchen once a week for an hour, looking at drawings that she'd made of space designs and an application she'd filled out for nonprofit status. Oh, wow. If Carrie was sleep deprived, she was getting a lot more accomplished than the rest of us. Slowly her vision began to take shape. I came to a meeting with Bob and Anne-Marie and Sam, and more pieces came together. I let myself imagine working on this for a while. Now that I'd seen everything she'd done, Carrie didn't seem like such a nut job anymore. She seemed like someone who'd taken a Herculean task and broken it into pieces in order to accomplish it bit by bit. Gradually, I found myself caring more and more. I wanted Ethan to have those classes. I wanted that lobby to sit in for an hour and visit with my friends. I wanted the future such a place suggested we might have. A place with welcoming smiles and open doors, one where I might not have to apologize for or explain my child. I wanted it so much, I started to worry that it might not happen. Now, it's 11 years later, and it's remarkable to stand here today and talk about the journey of my professional writing, because it so closely parallels the journey of whole children. In Eye Contact, my most successful book for adults, was published in 2006, 2 years after Whole Children opened. We celebrated with a book event at which I couldn't yet admit what I now know is true. I never could have written that book or any of the books I've written since without Whole Children. The fundamental philosophy here that we allow our children to be themselves even as we push them beyond the low expectations others have told us to have for them, shifted my thinking about almost everything in my life. First and foremost, I stopped feeling sorry for myself for thinking that Ethan's diagnosis was a tragedy that we would be coping with for the rest of our lives. I looked at him and realized this certainly wasn't how he saw himself. He had a lot of passions and interests and a life he was eager to get on with. Second, I looked around at our classes and our lobby and saw it filled with more children like Ethan than I ever thought possible. We were not alone. In fact, quite the opposite. Today in America, we have over 3 million teenagers and children with disabilities severe enough they will need assistance to one day live independently. Over 10% of our population. Grouped together, people with disabilities are by far the largest minority in this country, yet they are also unarguably the least represented in popular culture. Try to think of examples and really only a handful come to mind. Of books, TV, movies, Glee, Big Bang Theory. These aren't bad examples, but also not ones, I would argue, that really take on the complexity of the experience. Big Bang Theory, for instance, gets mentioned a lot for its celebration of Asperger-y characters, yet they never, to my knowledge, mention the word Asperger's. There's almost a shyness about directly naming the difference, as if that might make everyone uncomfortable. Which leads me to the third thing I have learned through Whole Children. Naming that difference, describing it, explaining it, even writing a whole book about it, doesn't make people uncomfortable. In fact, it does the opposite. I saw this over and over with the volunteers and typically developing children who came and helped out in our early classes. A little information goes a long, long way to bridge any initial hesitation. Here's why he rocks, here's why he sticks his fingers in his ears. He repeats what you've just said sometimes to process it in his mind. When given little suggestions like this, the responses were almost always the same. Oh, okay. And then the child or volunteer set about getting to know the child. In those early days, when I brought Ethan's brothers, Charlie and Henry, to Whole Children, I saw firsthand how rewarding it is for typically developing children to befriend a child with disabilities who might need their help. They can see what they are good at and get even better. They can demonstrate the social skills they are only just now learning themselves. They can learn the immeasurable satisfaction of generosity and compassion. In the 2 young adult books I've written most recently, I focused particularly on this intersection of disabled and non-disabled teens being put together and forced to get to know one another. In Say What You Will, a highly intelligent 18-year-old girl named Amy, who is nonverbal with cerebral palsy, uses a computer to ask her parents to hire peer helpers instead of an adult aide for her last year of high school so that she might finally make a friend. As she befriends one of them, Matthew, she discovers he has his own hidden disability, a closely guarded secret that's eating away at him. By being herself, open about her own limitations and frank about his, she helps him find a path to a broader, better life. In A Step Toward Falling, my most recent, the two typically developing teens, who witness an assault on a peer with a disability and fail to act, are forced to volunteer at a community center much like Whole Children. This book has a storyline that parallels Pride and Prejudice, an idea I must thank Molly, a friend sitting here today, for giving me. Talking to Molly, who loves Pride and Prejudice, and especially the Colin Firth BBC production, with a passion that reminded me of my own love for that great 4-part miniseries when I watched it as a teenager with my mom and my grandmother. It also reminded me of why so much of Jane Austen, and especially Pride and Prejudice, feels as pertinent today as it was when it was written. It's a story about judging others based on appearances and of getting past those first judgments, of climbing over the hesitation that difference creates. Those old class divisions aren't so different from the divisions of ability that separate kids today. It's safe to say that we live in a radically different time now for young people with disabilities. When I was growing up, I never saw another person with Down syndrome or autism or any other developmental disability until I was in the 8th grade and met the 40-year-old daughter of my grandmother's friend. Today, our children with disabilities attend the same schools and as often as possible participate in the same classes. No child in America, I dare say, has no idea what an autistic child looks or acts like anymore. But this doesn't mean they know what to say or do around one. How could they? They aren't mind readers of a brain that works entirely differently than theirs. They might want to reach out, might intuit helpful gestures, but they could be wrong. Why risk it in a hallway with someone who seems so unpredictable? I started writing these books with the hope that telling the stories of these characters who are in some ways quite different than their typically developing peers, and in others really not different at all, hoping to demystify the experience and lower the walls that divide these kids from their peers who would like to say hello and aren't at this point quite sure how. I wanted my books to be the equivalent of those early conversations with volunteers at Hold Children. This is why he does that. Don't worry if he bounces away. Yes, she uses a computer to talk, but take a moment and listen to what she has to say. As I worked on them, though, I must confess, I began to want them to do a little bit more. Especially with a step toward Falling, my most recent book, where so much of it is set in a center modeled after Hold Children, and based on the work our extraordinary teachers and staff do every day. I wanted those characters to learn some of the lessons that I have here, from these teachers, but also from these students. That differences shouldn't be feared or hidden, that joy comes from following your passions, that every life, even one with limitations, is valuable and rich with stories worth sharing. In short, I wanted these characters to be changed by Hold Children the way I have been. I wanted them to feel bleak at first with the discovery of their own weakness and failure to act, and then empowered as they watch their fellow students, the ones with the label of developmental disability, push past their own limitations. This is a phenomenal thing to witness. It happens every day at Hold Children, and each time, as a parent who remembers the children these guys once were, the preschooler who couldn't manage the monkey bar, the boy who sifted wood chips for hours, it catches my breath to see them now, singing a solo on stage, DJing a dance, cooking and serving food in the cafe. I wanted my characters to watch this and feel differently about their own lives as I do about mine. I wanted them to feel what I do when I see all of these kids. Anything is possible and anything can happen. As a final note, I just want to say one more thing. When I look over the last 11 years of publishing and watching Hold Children grow, it's clear to me that the one thing that scared me most was not having a book tank completely, because this inevitably will happen to every writer sooner or later, and you might as well get it over with. The thing I was most scared of over these last 10 years was Hold Children closing. And over the years, there have been many brushes with this possibility. In the early days, we had to scale back many times. We had to run only a handful of classes or have administrators work without salaries for a long time. During those years, many of you sitting here were the heroes who pulled us through. You recognized the value of what we were doing. You saw the importance to our children and to the livelihood of our families. I'm so sorry. Many of you don't even live nearby, nor do you have children directly affected by this experience. You were aunts and uncles and grandparents. You were legislators who took time to visit our site and see its potential. You were directors of DDS who saw right away how smart Carrie was and visionary with that early seed of an idea. You were and are board members who have tirelessly thought of imaginative new ways to raise money and participate in this mission. You were our friends who, without ever being directly asked, said, "How can I help?" And even the early days when it was excruciatingly hard for any of us to form the words, "Can you give us money?" you did so. You understood how much it meant when we couldn't even ask. You sensed what the state has now seen, what the 800 families we have served have discovered, that more children and more families are being served here at a higher quality for less money, because what we have created is a community in which the families served are part of it all and gratefully give back. Heroes to stand, because all of you are part of this now. If you're here today, you're part of a changing landscape and an altered future for all of our children. This award is only partly for me because I happened to be standing in the park when the dream was conceived. Really, it's for all of us and for all of you who believed a diagnosis is not a tragedy and helped us find a way to put that belief into action. You have sustained this dream and made it a reality that has lasted for more than a decade, which I'm pretty sure means the dream has come true.